The Kansas prairie stretched endlessly under a pale orange dawn. In the distance, the Harper farm sat like a small island of hope, acres of wheat swaying, a red barn proud against the wind, and the smell of fresh hay mixing with morning dew. Eli Harper, a 42-year-old farmer with calloused hands and steady eyes, stood on his porch sipping black coffee. His wife, Margaret, hummed softly behind him, kneading dough for the morning bread. Their 15-year-old daughter, Clara, was feeding the chickens, her laughter light and bright, the sound Eli always said could wake up the sun itself. Life wasn't easy, but it was honest. Neighbors respected Eli, hardworking, fair, and deeply protective of his land. That year, the wheat promised to be their best yield yet. For once, the bank would be paid on time, and Clara could maybe attend the county school in Topeka. Her dream. But that was before the first fire. The first fire came on a windless night in June. Margaret was jolted awake by the scent of smoke. Outside, the eastern field glowed, orange tongues licking the darkness. Eli grabbed his boots, shouting for water and buckets. He and Clara ran barefoot through the grass, beating at flames with wet blankets. Neighbors arrived soon after, forming a desperate bucket line from the well. By sunrise, the field was black, a quarter of their wheat lost. No lightning, no storm, just fire, sudden and fierce without a single trace of how it began. The sheriff came that morning. Could have been a spark from a lantern or maybe a cigarette tossed from the road, he guessed. But Eli didn't smoke. None of them did. He stared at the ashes, jaw tight. Fires don't just start out of nowhere, he said quietly. By July, the prairie was whispering. People in the nearby town of Cottonwood Creek started talking that maybe the Harpers were cursed. A widow at the general store muttered, "First their barn burns, next it'll be the house." The prairie don't forgive secrets. Margaret tried to ignore them, but Clara noticed her mother's hands trembling more at supper. Eli stopped going into town. The rumors stung, but worse was the way neighbors started keeping their distance, even the ones who had helped that first night. Then, 2 weeks later, another fire. This time, the barn. Eli woke to the sound of animals screaming. By the time they got the door open, half the roof had fallen in. They managed to free the horses, but the barn collapsed in a wave of red heat. It burned to the ground. Margaret clutched Clara, weeping, while Eli stared into the blaze, face orange with reflected firelight, eyes hollow. The sheriff shook his head. "It's too much of a coincidence," he said. And Eli began to wonder if maybe it wasn't coincidence at all. A week after the barn fire, Eli found footprints near the edge of his property. Boot prints, leading to the back fence and stopping by a pile of old wheat straw. That same day, a stranger came riding through. A drifter, calling himself Jonas Pike, said he was just looking for a day's work and a meal. Eli didn't like strangers much, but his fields needed tending. He hired Jonas to help replant the burned acres. The man worked hard, silent most of the time, his face shadowed under a wide-brim hat. But something about him was off. The way he'd stare at the charred barn or ask strange questions about how the fire started. One evening, Eli caught Jonas near the well, tossing something metallic into the water. When Eli asked what it was, Jonas just said, "Old matches, sir." Thought they might bring bad luck. That night Margaret urged Eli to let the man go, but Eli shook his head. "No proof he's done wrong. And we need the help." Sometimes doing what's practical blinds a man to what's right. It came during a stormless night again. Margaret had been sewing by lamplight when she heard a soft crackle from the pantry. When she opened the door, flames burst upward, climbing the shelves like living creatures. She screamed for Eli, and together they threw water until the fire hissed and died. The pantry was ruined, black with soot, The wall behind it charred deep. The sheriff returned and found something strange. A small oil can, half hidden near the window. Someone had been using kerosene. But there were no fingerprints, no witnesses. Jonas was gone, vanished before sunrise. For the first time, Eli felt fear, not just of losing his farm, but of something darker. Someone, or something, wanted them gone. The town turned cold. When Eli went to the mercantile, people whispered as he passed. 3 fires? Must be insurance, one man sneered. Or maybe the girl did it, said another, nodding toward Clara, who had come with her father. Clara burst into tears, running out of the store. That night, Eli slammed his fist on the kitchen table. I'm done letting people talk like that, Margaret tried to calm him. We'll rebuild, Eli. That's what we do. But Eli's eyes were red. I can't rebuild what keeps burning, Maggie. In the silence that followed, the wind howled through the cracks of the old house, carrying the faint smell of smoke, though no fire burned. Margaret began keeping a journal. Each night she'd write about the fires, about Clara's nightmares, about how the wheat fields no longer felt alive, only haunted. One entry read, "If these fires come again, I fear they will take more than wood and wheat. They'll take what's left of us." Eli found the journal one morning and saw the trembling words. It broke something in him, the idea that his wife lived in fear in the home he built. He wrote a letter to the sheriff, begging for an investigation, but never sent it. Instead, he folded it and kept it in his coat pocket. Some things a man has to fight himself, he told himself. But the Prairie had other plans. August 18th, 1910. The night that would mark the Harpers forever. The moon hung full over the fields. Clara had been reading by lamplight when she saw an orange glow outside. The chicken coop was burning. She screamed for her parents. Eli and Margaret ran out, but as they reached the coop, they saw something that froze them where they stood. The flames were forming strange shapes, twisting like fingers reaching upward, and they heard what sounded like whispering from within the fire. Margaret swore she heard her mother's voice. Eli saw something else, a figure just beyond the firelight, standing still. When the blaze finally died, nothing remained but blackened wood and silence. But in the ashes, Eli found something half buried, a metal locket, scorched but intact. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman, and the initials E.H. Eli Harper's face went pale. He whispered, "That's my sister's locket, but she's been gone 20 years." Eli's sister Evelyn Harper had vanished in 1890 after a bitter argument over their inheritance. She'd left home and was never seen again. Rumor said she died in a fire at a boarding house 2 states over. Now her locket had somehow appeared in the ashes of their chicken coop. Margaret begged Eli to tell the sheriff, but Eli shook his head. "Who'd believe me? They already think we're cursed." That night, Clara awoke to find her window open, cold wind blowing through. In the distance, she saw a faint flicker of fire at the edge of the field, and beside it, a shadowy figure, long hair blowing, face lit by flame. When she blinked, it was gone. She whispered into the darkness, "Aunt Evelyn?" By morning, Eli could barely hold his hand steady. He went to the barn's remains and sat among the ashes, whispering to himself. When Margaret found him, he confessed the truth he had buried for 20 years. "I never told you what happened that night," he said quietly. "When Evelyn left, it wasn't just words. We fought. I pushed her. She fell, hit her head. I thought she was dead. I panicked. I burned her letters, her things. I didn't know what else to do." Tears streaked his face as he spoke. "The fire at her boarding house. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe she's been here all along trying to make me remember." Margaret knelt beside him, holding his shaking hands. "Eli, maybe she doesn't want revenge. Maybe she just wants peace. That night, Eli lit a lantern and walked to the center of the blackened field. He whispered into the wind, "Evelyn, I'm sorry." And for the first time in months, the prairie was still. For days after Eli's confession, not a single spark rose from the prairie. The nights were strangely calm, too calm. Even the crickets seemed to fall silent, as if the land itself was listening. Margaret began to believe the fires were truly gone, but Eli wasn't so sure. Guilt had a way of finding oxygen, even in still air. He worked from dawn to dusk, repairing the fence lines and cutting scorched timber. Clara noticed how quiet her father had become. He moved like a man walking among ghosts, his eyes distant, his hands trembling whenever he passed the burned edges of the fields. Then, one evening, while Clara was washing dishes, she saw something flickering in the glass window. For a moment, she thought it was firelight again, but it was just the sunset glowing over the blackened land. "Still," she whispered, "Aunt Evelyn, please let him rest." And somewhere, far out in the prairie wind, there was a sound, almost like a sigh. A few days later, a man rode up to the Harper home. He introduced himself as Deputy Samuel Reed from Cottonwood Creek. "I heard about your fires," he said gently. "And about that drifter, Jonas Pike. He's wanted in 3 counties for arson and fraud." Margaret's eyes widened. "You think he's the one who set the fires?" Reed nodded. "Could be. He's known to start fires to cover up theft. Folks said he was asking questions about old property lines and family feuds. Sound familiar?" Eli's stomach turned cold. He remembered the locket, the initials, E.H., his sister's mark. But how would Jonas have gotten it? Deputy Reed promised to send word if the man was caught. Before leaving, he added, "Whatever he wanted here, Mr. Harper, it wasn't just fire. He was looking for something buried deep." After he left, Margaret looked at Eli. "Do you think Evelyn's locket was what he was after?" Eli whispered, "or what he was meant to find?" That night, Clara had a dream. She saw the burned barn whole again, golden and glowing in the moonlight. A woman stood by the door, her long hair drifting like smoke. In her hand, she held a small stack of letters tied with a ribbon. When Clara woke, she couldn't shake the image, so she went to the barn, ruins at dawn, kneeling in the ash, searching without knowing why. And there, buried under the charred planks, she found a tin box, rusted but intact. Inside were old letters, their edges scorched but legible. They were addressed to Eli Harper, written by Evelyn, postmarked from towns across Kansas. Each letter began the same way. "Dear brother, I forgive you." Margaret gasped when she read them. Evelyn had never died in that fire. She'd written for years trying to make peace. But Eli had never received a single letter. Someone, maybe their father, had hidden them. Now, 20 years later, the earth itself had returned them. Eli spent the night reading every letter by lamplight. His hands shook as he traced the words: forgiveness, regret, hope. In one, Evelyn had written, "If ever you see fire in your fields, Eli, don't fear it. The prairie renews itself by flame. It burns so that new life can grow." Tears fell down his weathered face. He understood then the fires were never meant to destroy. They were a call to face what had long been buried, the truth, the guilt, and the love he'd tried to forget. At dawn, he took Claire and Margaret to the eastern field, the one burned first. He dropped to his knees and began digging near the old oak tree, where he remembered burying his sister's belongings that awful night. After a few minutes, the shovel struck metal. It was a rusted lockbox. Inside were Evelyn's letters, charred ribbons, and a small silver cross. Margaret whispered, "Eli, she never left you." That evening, Eli made a choice. He gathered every remaining relic of guilt, the letters, the old matches, the burned ribbons, and placed them in the fire pit behind the house. Claire and Margaret watched as he struck a match. For a moment, the flames burned high, the smoke curling upward in soft, dancing shapes. And then something extraordinary happened. The flames turned blue, glowing like pure light, almost gentle. They didn't spread or destroy. They seemed to breathe. Margaret swore she saw a silhouette, a woman's shape, standing in the blue fire, her hand outstretched in peace. Clara whispered, trembling, "She's here, Mama." Eli dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Evelyn," he said softly, "I'm sorry." The fire flickered once, then died, leaving only cool embers that glowed like starlight. The air smelled sweet again. For the first time in months, the prairie didn't smell like smoke. It smelled like rain. That night the skies opened, thunder rolled across the horizon, and rain poured over the burned land, heavy, cleansing, unstoppable. Margaret laughed and cried all at once as water soaked through the earth, washing away the ash. Eli stood in the middle of the field, arms open, face lifted to the sky. Clara twirled in the rain, whispering, "She brought it." Aunt Evelyn brought it by morning. The blackened fields shimmered with silver dew. Tiny green shoots poked through the soil, new wheat impossibly fast. Eli stared at them, unable to believe. "It's too soon," he murmured. Margaret smiled. "Maybe it's time." The prairie, once burned and barren, had begun to heal, just as the Harpers were. A week later, Deputy Reed returned. He dismounted his horse and said, "We found Jonas Pike, dead." Struck by lightning on the old trail west of here, Eli looked at the deputy, silent. Reed continued, "He was carrying a locket, same as the one you found. Sheriff thinks he was digging up old graves for valuables. I guess his luck ran out." Eli nodded slowly. "Maybe it wasn't lightning that found him. Maybe justice did." Reed tipped his hat. "Whatever happened, Mr. Harper, it's over now." After the deputy left, Eli held the locket in his hands. He placed it under the oak tree again, this time not as a burial, but as a resting place. "Sleep easy, sis," he whispered. "You've done your work." By September, the land had transformed. The new wheat grew taller than any Eli had ever seen, strong, golden, unbent by the wind. Word spread across the county that the Harpers' burned fields were blooming like never before. Neighbors who once whispered curses now came to help harvest. "Never seen anything like it," said one man, shaking his head. "That soil's richer than gold now." Margaret smiled, handing him a basket. "Sometimes things have to burn before they can grow again," she said softly. That year the Harpers produced the largest crop in all of Cottonwood County. Enough to rebuild, enough to share, enough to start anew. In the following spring, Eli built a new barn, not large, not grand, but honest. Inside, he placed a single plaque on the wall engraved with the words, "To Evelyn Harper, whose fire taught us to forgive." Clara often sat there at dusk, reading her aunt's letters and feeling the prairie wind move through the open doors. She swore she could hear faint laughter in the rustling wheat, soft and content. The Harpers never had another fire after that. But every summer evening when the sky turned red with sunset, the horizon would glow, not with flame, but with light. Margaret would look out and whisper, "She's watching," and Eli would nod, smiling quietly. She always was. Years later, long after Eli and Margaret passed, Clara Harper became known throughout Kansas as the keeper of the Harper Fields. She told her children the story every harvest, of the fires that once consumed everything her family had, and of the spirit who taught them what forgiveness truly means. She would end every story the same way. Fire doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it clears the way for what's meant to grow. And on quiet nights, when the wind blew across the Kansas prairie, travelers swore they saw a faint blue shimmer over the old Harper farm, like a flame that refused to die, not out of anger, but out of love, a love that had once been buried beneath the ashes and had finally found peace beneath the stars.